Well, hello everybody. Welcome to today's video where we're going to talk about a change that's going to take place in the 2020 National Electrical Code. So this is part of our new preview series where we talk about potential changes that are going to take place to the National Electrical Code and kind of give you a heads up on where it's going, what kind of things have changed. And so we're going to start looking at different changes to kind of give you that heads up. So as the screen shows today, we're looking at a change that's taking place to the requirements for the perimeter of pools in dealing with the equipotential bonding grid or plane as it's in section 680.26b2. Okay, so in this presentation, we're kind of going to look at the change and what's to take place. Now, the only significant change here is that we're giving you an additional method in order to create this equipotential bonding plane to get rid of those differences of potential. And so what we've done is added something to the code. And there's been a lot of debate in this, whether or not the single wire 8 gauge around the perimeter, contoured perimeter of the pool is adequate in order to remove those potentials. And the consensus was it wasn't adequate, but it's been in the code forever and nobody's willing to go out on a limb and remove it. Although as a member of that code panel, nobody could justify why we'd leave it because there was no substantiation to does it work or not. We just kind of looked and said, well, we don't have any deaths that we know of contributing just to that, so we'll go on and leave it. But substantial submission and substantiation was submitted to get the grid added. So it's kind of weird. It was been one of those things where if it had been my preference, we would have removed the ability to run the single wire around the perimeter of the pool and opt for this grid method. And again, enough data was provided to say that that was the best way to go. So as you can see, this is what we're looking at for the change in the 2020 code is the perimeter surface. Now you see that some of the language was changed in here. You see things that were struck out and things that were underlined. Okay, and so one of the things is, you know, this copper grid that we have here, or the copper ring, excuse me. This was what we had before. It was considered an alternate means, but now it's just in positive text. It's just one of the methods you can use, and we've you know, again, there's not a significant change here except for the application where it says, previously it says only listed splices shall be permitted, and now it says listed splicing devices or exothermic welding. Okay, before exothermic welding would have been one of the options anyway, and of course the options are going to send you back to 250.8 anyway for those type of things, but at the end of the day, it's now just called the copper ring method, and it's again minimum 8 around the perimeter of the contour of the pool. If it's a conductive pool shell, then you connect it all 4 corners, and so that didn't change. It's located 18 to 24 inches from the inside walls of the pool. Again, the substantiation for that really wasn't there, and nobody could really pinpoint how it got in the code, and I'm saying this from a code panel perspective. It wasn't really good, but it's hard to remove things out of the code and get everybody to buy into it because it's been there, and it really hasn't been that much reported about accidents related to it, or usually it's from some other reason. It doesn't correlate directly to the issue of whether or not the 8 gauge around the perimeter was adequate. But when the testing was done, in order to be able to come down here and see where the copper grid was added, here, there was substantial levels of information provided. Enough so that I even gave a passionate plea, you know, which is rare for me, that we should really have either the structural reinforcing steel or a copper grid, because keeping those differences of potential, we're never going to get rid of the voltage and currents traveling on the earth. It's just the way it is. We're not going to get rid of it. However, we could minimize the differences of potential, and that's what we're trying to do here with this perimeter surface requirement. And we would have gone a long way in doing this copper grid, which is very similar to the concept when it comes to the pool shell. If you don't have a conductive pool shell, if you have a conductive pool shell and it's not rebar, and if it's encased, then you put the copper grid under it, because we know that a copper grid works. Okay, and that's the requirements we see up here for the conductive pool shell. You can either go with the structural reinforcing steel, or you can go with a copper conductor grid, and it gives you the methods of how to construct that. Well, it seemed to me kind of foolish that if it's good for the actual conductive pool shell, then why would it not be adequate for the perimeter surface to carry that over? And really, there was arguments back and forth, but I can tell you this was certain people were really geared towards wanting to keep the single, and I'm just not going to go into that. I'll take the high road and leave it as it is. But we're all about reducing the possibilities of electrocution, of things like that. And I'm telling you, I don't see any evidence where the single wire is adequate, but I see lots of evidence where the copper grid is. Is a copper grid going to cost more? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's more copper. I get it. Does the pool industry hate that? Absolutely. But again, a lot of times people are about profit, and so they can spin that on the other foot. The other foot could be, well, you want to sell more copper, and so copper's after that, or the copper associations and all that. Well, to me, it's all about safety. And when I saw black and white, which one was more adequate based on good test data, I mean, really good test data, it was a no-brainer to me. But obviously, it was good enough to at least get the copper grid method. So I'm employing to you out there, people that are doing pools, that yes, it costs a little more to do the copper grid, but I'll be honest with you, it's the way to go if you want to make it safe. Now, if this ends up going to court someday and somebody put in this ring method, now that this gets in the code in 2020, and I argue that the copper grid would have done better based on the research that was provided, you might get a judge that say, you know what, I don't know what those people were thinking. That copper ring is not adequate, and who knows what how the judge is going to rule on that. But now that the copper grid's going to be in there, I can, as a expert witness, can point to the fact that I believe individuals made a mistake based on the data that was provided, and the copper grid is the safer method to do the perimeter, unless you're doing structural reinforcing steel. Okay? So again, all going to be how somebody wants to argue that out. So what I wanted to show you is the actual change that is proposed here, and it looks like it's going to make it through. In fact, they just had the correlating committee meeting and they didn't alter it in any way. So the next thing is the NITMAMs, and I don't think it's going to be removed, because all it's doing is adding you another method. Yes, this method here is more costly, but I think it actually works. And why would we want to play? If I was building a pool over my perimeter around my house and I was doing a pool, I would go with the copper grid. Is it going to cost me a little more? Yeah, but we're already talking about an expensive pool anyway, so why not make it as safe as possible? So here, and there are other alternate methods. Again, structural reinforcing steel is another method, and so regular steel fencing wire that's placed in the decking concrete material could meet the requirements in 68026B1A. So there's not more cost-effective methods to do that. Okay, so at the end of the day, we added the copper grid, and again, if it's good for the conductive pool shell, it should be good for the perimeter. Okay, now it says where the structural reinforcing steel is not available or is encapsulated in non-conductive compound, copper grid shall be utilized where the following requirements are met. Again, the copper grid, just like it was up here in B1, no different, that it shall be 8 AWG solid bare copper and be arranged in accordance with 680.26B1B3. Okay? All right, so again, when we say B1, B1B3, we're talking, bring you back up here. So B1B3, B1B3, this is the arrangement, okay? Uniformed arrangement. 12 inches by 12 inch network of conductors spaced and uniformly perpendicular. Basically like a fence grid, if you will. Okay, so it gives you the idea of how it's to be constructed, and it tells us that the grid shall follow the contour of the perimeter that extend 3 feet horizontally beyond the inside wall of the pool. Again, not real much difference in that. Again, it's following your contour. Only listed splicing devices or exothermic welding shall be permitted. Most of the time, these grids are made in a mat format, but you can splice them together. And you're looking for the connections that are rated for direct burial, obviously. And you're going to look and make sure that they also, in this case, meet the requirements of 250.8 as well for those type of devices in their listings. And then, of course, here the copper grid shall be secured within or under the deck or unpaved surfaces between 4 inches to 6 inches below the subgrade. Okay, so the installation's not any different than what you would do for the copper ring, but it's just giving you another method to be able to do that. So of these three, which do I think is probably the best in my opinion? Based on what I've seen, I think the copper grid's probably the best as far as being able to create that equipotential so that you don't have two differences of touch potential. You know, current travels due to differences of potential. So that's one of the aspects where I think the copper grid really works exceptionally well. If you have reinforcing conductive pull shell and you carry that rebar out into the decking, then that's fine as well. It's very adequate. If it's good for the conductive pull shell, it's obviously good for the perimeter. Again, reminding you that where you have non-conductive pull shells, bonding at the full point should not be required, but that does not remove the perimeter surface requirement. I get a lot of questions about that. So if it's a vinyl pool or a fiberglass pool, you obviously don't have a conductive pull shell to worry about, but you still have a perimeter that you have to worry about. Okay, you're not removed from it. You just don't have to connect the perimeter surface requirement to the pull shell because they aren't conductive, if you will. Okay. All right, so just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about this one here. Again, this is changing and adding another element, copper grid. Again, you can use any method, and this is the way it was in the previous 2017 code. And the only thing that changed here was instead of calling it alternate means, it is just a means, an acceptable, positive way to do it if that's the way you want to do it. And of course, we added the copper grid as well. So that's really all we have. And it was kind of a quick episode, but just want to give you a heads up. That is one of the changes that are coming to the 2020 National Electrical Code, unless anything changes otherwise in the NIPMAN stage. So there you go. So there's a change that we're seeing in the pool industry when it comes to creating that equipotential bonding grid. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.